Picture the boy standing at the gate of Yama's house in the realm of the god. It is, in its deepest nature, simply the witness, the one whose presence gives the journey its meaning. The charioteer is the buddhi, the discriminating intellect. The body is mainly guided by the intelligence, as a chariot is mainly guided by its driver. And then, at verse 1.3.4, Yama continues, Indriyani hayanahur vishayams teshu gocharan. The senses, indriya, are the horses. The objects of sense, vishaya, are what they range over. The roads the horses want to travel. And the composite of Atman with senses and mind, the Upanishad tells us at that same verse, is what the wise call the bhaktri, the enjoyer, the experiencer. This is the conditioned self, the Atman that has become so identified with its instruments, body, mind, senses, that it believes it is those instruments. The horse believes it is the destination. What determines the journey's outcome is the quality of the charioteer. In verse 1.3.5, Yama gives the negative case. He who is without vijnana, without understanding, whose mind is not held firm, his senses are uncontrolled, like vicious horses under a poor driver. In verse 1.3.6, the positive case. He who has understanding, whose mind is constantly held firm, his senses are controlled, like good horses. The grammatical parallel is deliberate. Yama is not speaking about moral willpower in any simple sense. He is describing an ontological condition, the quality of discrimination that either allows the higher to govern the lower, or allows the lower to drag the higher along wherever appetite points. Consider someone in their late 30s who grew up watching a parent drink. They promised themselves they would never repeat it. But 1 decade into a marriage, strained by financial worry and the slow withdrawal of a teenager from the family's emotional life, the drink at the end of the evening has become 3, then 4, and they are beginning to lie about it in small ways. They are not a bad person. The Atman, riding in their chariot, is not corrupt. But the charioteer has dozed. The manas, the mind with its anxiety and its habits, and its short-term relief-seeking, has loosened the reins. And the horses, the senses, the indriya, are following the road that feels most immediately relieving. The chariot is still moving. That is what makes it hard to see clearly. It is moving, just not toward Shreyas. Verses 1.3.7 through 1.3.9 give the two outcomes in full. He who lacks discrimination, whose mind is unsteady and heart impure, is born again and again, the chariot circles. But he who has discrimination, whose mind is steady and heart is pure, reaches the goal and is born no more. And that goal is described in Robert Hume's translation as the supreme abode of Vishnu, the all-pervading. Here the tradition splits in a way the text demands we acknowledge. Reading Vedic, rather than sectarian usage, clarifies that Vishnu in the early Vedas appears as a form of the solar principle, and the phrase Vishnu's highest place is a cosmological expression for the zenith, the highest point of traversal. Madhvacharya, reading from within the Dvaita Vedanta tradition, hears in the same phrase a direct reference to the deity Vishnu as Supreme Lord, a reading that became foundational for his theistic interpretation of the entire Upanishad. Both readings are alive in the tradition. What neither reading disputes is the direction of the journey, upward, inward, toward the irreducible. Then, in verses 1.3.10 and 1.3.11, the chariot analogy opens into a full ontological hierarchy. Higher than the senses are the objects of sense. Higher than those objects is the mind, manas. Higher than the mind is the intellect, buddhi. Higher than the intellect is the great self, Mahan Atman. And then, above the great self, is the avyakta, the unmanifest, the undifferentiated ground before any form arises. Above the unmanifest is the Purusa, the Supreme Person, and above the Purusa there is nothing at all. Purusan na param kinchit. That is the goal. That is the highest course. What Yama has done is remarkable. He has embedded the chariot in a larger map. The chariot metaphor describes the human psychophysical constitution. The hierarchy of 1.3.10 to 11 situates that constitution within a cosmological structure. The charioteer governs the horses, yes, but the charioteer is herself subordinate to something above her, and that something is subordinate to something above it, all the way to the level at which nothing further can be said. Scholar Gerald James Larson has identified in precisely this hierarchy some of the earliest traces of Samkhya philosophical vocabulary, the tradition that would later give Indian philosophy its most systematic account of matter and spirit. The chariot is not merely a moral teaching, it is at its root an ontological one. Verse 1.3.13 gives the method corresponding to this map. Yama says, an intelligent person should suppress speech in the mind in the understanding self, the understanding in the great self, and that in the tranquil self, Shanta Atman. The path is precisely the reverse of the hierarchy's downward cascade of manifestation. To return toward the Purusa is to progressively withdraw attention from the outer instruments back through their sources. Horses stilled, reins relaxed, charioteer no longer navigating, but resting in the awareness of the passenger. A father and adult daughter have not spoken for 3 years over something said at a family gathering, something that neither of them now fully remembers the exact shape of, only the heat. The daughter has rehearsed her anger so many times that the manas, the mind with its vivid replay and its certainty, has become the de facto charioteer. The buddhi, the part of her that knows grief, has a longer shelf life than grievance, that time is shortening, that her father is aging, that part is there, present, but subordinated. The horses have been running the same circuit for 36 months. The Upanishad would say the chariot is in motion, but the charioteer is asleep, and no one is asking where the passenger, the one who persists through all of it, actually wants to arrive. At verse 1.3.14, Yama delivers the famous exhortation. The Sanskrit phrase is rendered as Uttishtata, Jagrata, Prapya Varan, Nibodhata. Arise, awake, approach the great, and learn. Vivekananda carried this phrase into the modern world as a rallying call. Its context inside the Katha Upanishad is quieter than that use suggests. It follows the teaching of inward withdrawal. It is less a battle cry than a reminder that understanding requires the effort of a return, a movement against the natural downward current of distraction, habit, and pleasure-seeking. Nachiketas, having received all of this, is described at the Upanishad's conclusion as having become free from impurities and death. The boy who stood 3 nights without food at a threshold, who refused kingdoms in exchange for the truth, arrives at what he came for. What to carry forward into your actual day. The Katha Upanishad is not asking whether you are a spiritual person. It is asking a simpler and harder question. Who is driving the chariot right now? Not the Atman, which is always present as the silent passenger, but the charioteer. Is it buddhi, the discriminating faculty that knows the difference between what is genuinely good and what is merely immediately relieving? Or has the mind, with its emotions and its habits, picked up the reins? The teaching is not that the horses are evil or that the roads are forbidden. It is that a chariot without a waking charioteer does not go nowhere. It goes somewhere, just not toward the highest course. The horses always know which road smells familiar.